Are you struggling in your faith? Are you pretending you're happy but stuck in a spiritual rut? Are you tired of listening to famous pastors and preachers who make it sound so easy? Welcome to Broken Catholic, the #1 Protestant and Catholic voice in America. I talk about the important things that nobody else is talking about, like how to align with God's plan for your life, because I believe this is where 90% of Christians get stuck. And I tackle the negative self-talk that we all secretly struggle with but won't admit. My guests are brave Protestants and Catholics who share their struggles, their fears, and their daily holy habits that help them win in their spiritual lives. I'm your host, your coach, your friend, Joseph Warren. I'm also a broken Catholic and former atheist, and a spiritual coach to Christian business owners and CEOs who are married with children. This show was created for you, the broken Catholic who's pushing to get your spouse, your kids, and yourself to heaven. Wherever you are in your spiritual journey, you're just one surrender prayer away. What's present in your heart and mind right now that maybe you're moving towards? God's been showing you, God's been opening up something with you in that, or there's been just really strong struggle maybe in that, because God grows us through friction. And so I'm just wondering, is there anything there? Because like you said, it's my show and I can kind of shift the content as needed.
Right.
Anything showing up for you there? If so, great. And if not, no big deal.
Well, I think, what the presiding emotion in this season is just a lot of grief and loss. Not just from the children themselves. Our family went through a season of just loss after loss. One of which was my youngest brother, my youngest and only brother. And so it's funny because I've been talking about this move for a couple of years. And right before he passed, I started looking at what it would look like to go back to New Jersey, like sending my licensure to be changed to New Jersey and all kinds of things. And then right before the holidays last year, he passed on December 20th. And so that's been a big presence in this move as well, because it's like, oh goodness, now there's purpose in moving, because now, things are a little bit more clarifying as far as why to move and wanting to be closer to family. And I'm 45 and I would like to live the second half of my life, close. I want to be known. I want to be around people that knows me and loves me, and a community that supports me. And it's funny because I sent for my license to be transferred to New Jersey. And the day the date on the letter they wrote me back was the actual day my brother died. So looking at that letter, I'm like, I don't know if, what's happening here, Spirit of God, what do you want from me? So we know the move is necessary, is needed, but it comes with a lot of grief and a lot of loss, just so many layers of loss. And so for people my age group who are in similar situations, empty nesters and transitions, there's loss and grief in it. There's so much in it. I tell my friends the scripture that keeps coming to me is Ruth 1, I think 2021, where Naomi was sharing of how bitter she was. And I don't think we give Naomi enough credit, because I think she was a theologian in her own right, teaching us about the theology of suffering, giving us language of those who suffer, what that language can sound like at times. When there's loss upon loss, you just feel like you ain't got nothing else to give. And so she's been leading the way in me just confronting my feelings with God and confronting my grief with God. So it's just been a season of loss, um, but also knowing the presence of God, because she can only say those things because she had a relationship with God. You can't really talk about God in such a way if you don't care and if you don't have a relationship, right? So
That's powerful. Let's speak about that today. And actually, I'm just going to go live with the show right now, if that's cool with you.
okay, let's do it.
Because we're in it. We're in it. We're surrendered
Yeah.
to God. And what does He want to say? So, BC Nation, we are speaking with Dieula Previlon. You can find her at eulaprevilon.com. And she was on my show several months ago, right? So you can find her at
Hmm.
episode 275. It's entitled "Why You Don't Have to Be Afraid to Finally Serve the Poor and Marginalized." And we had a really powerful conversation about moving to where the hurt is in the world, moving to where the suffering is in the world, rather than saying, God, bring it to me. We actually go out and look where God's already working in others' lives. And today she's openly sharing how she's moving from Texas back to New Jersey, her roots, her family, and why. And it's been that transition back has several factors in it. She's sharing, and hopefully you can relate somehow to her. Maybe you're an empty nester right now, or soon to be, or recently, and that's where her and her husband are entering into that new chapter of their life. Or maybe you've had loss and grief in your life recently and you're experiencing that now or a year ago. And that's where, you and a husband are right now. And that's part of their decision to get back with family, to really get back to who matters most, to get back
Right.
to those relationships that sometimes when we move away, we don't spend as much time, with those people that we used to spend every day with. And that we grow apart, right? When we don't spend as much time together. And so we're going to get into a little bit of that grief and loss and new chapters in your life and
Yeah.
bringing God into that. And and what an advantage it is to have that relationship with God versus someone who doesn't, who also experiences these things, but
Right.
has nowhere to bring it, has
Yeah.
no one to bring it to. So let's get into that conversation, Dieula. And, where has God really been showing up for you in the grief and loss and this new chapter you're headed into in your life?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, and thank you for having me back on the show. My name is usually one that is a stinker, and especially in America, because I was born in Haiti, and so it's Dieula.
I,
A
I
lot of
messed it
people
up
say
again.
Jula, or so it's whatever at this point. Um, where is God showing up? In this season of grief and loss. I think what I've sensed God doing in this season of grief and loss, and there are multi layers of grief and loss, with empty nesting. Our children are gone. They're off to college. One is graduating college. Two are sophomores in college, and we're in a big old empty house on our own. And I'm extroverted and I love people around, and I love, just feeling the energy of people. And so there's loss in that. And then there's loss from the pandemic. We lost a family member, and we lost several people that we've known from our church in New Jersey, um, who lost their lives from the pandemic. And then there's personal loss of family members who passed. We had a close cousin that passed a year ago this month. And then our nephew at 20, he was 20 at that time, passed on December 8th of last year. And then my brother passed December 20th of last year as well. So just multi layers of loss, tangible loss, and the ones that people wouldn't even categorize as loss. You know, your children leaving home, no one would ever say that there's grief and loss in that. You know, parents who have small children are home are rejoicing for us. You know, thinking that finally you're free. And but for us, we're like, there's loss. We don't know who we are, you know. For 18, 20 years, our life has been centered around parenting and taking care of them and making sure their needs were met. Now they don't need us in the same way anymore. They're spending less and less time with us. They're calling less and less. And we're fine with them finding their way and living as adults, but it also comes with loss. The loss of relationship, loss of closeness, loss. And so God, in this season, I think has been near. I'm reminded of the Psalm, I believe it's Psalm 34, where it says, you know, God is near and close to the brokenhearted. And I believe that is true for those who are deep in loss. When I came back from the holidays, because our plan for the holidays was to, as every holiday, was to go to New Jersey and have a big family gathering. Both my husband's family and my family are in New Jersey. And so our plan last Christmas was to connect with our family. First, we were going to have December 24th with our family, as we always do, with all the food and all the games and all of that. And then December 25th spent with my husband's family. Instead of that plan, we were planning funerals for my nephew in Georgia. So we had to fly to Georgia for my nephew's funeral. And then as we're on, you know, at my nephew's funeral, we're flying to New Jersey for my brother's funeral. So all of that, all of the holidays plans were just botched. So coming back from the holidays to Texas, I felt so broken. Like, I have never felt that level of grief and brokenness in my entire life. And my dad passed, my grandmother passed years ago. In 2012, my dad passed. My grandmother passed a year later. Even with their losses, I had never, ever felt so hollowed, so grief stricken, so empty. Like I had nothing left to give. I had nothing left to give. Um, you know, I feared coming back to Texas because I knew the boys would be going back to their lives, you know, back to school, back to college and all that. And my husband worked nights, and I feared being alone in my grief, in the darkness. Um, and it was bad. It was really bad. I really didn't have too many people to talk to because people don't like talking about grief and loss. People kind of they avoid those conversations like the plague because I mean, we live in America where everything is happy, you know. Every commercial is to try to avoid for us to avoid any semblance of pain and suffering. Shows are, you know, everything is to quell our pain and suffering, right? So with me and my grief and loss, it's like, you're on your own, sister. You better deal with that on your own. There were two people at work who, at my private practice, who suffered grief, just tremendous losses in their lives, who understood and sat with me. But outside of that, it was so hard to find a community of grievers. You know, they weren't around. But Naomi, I found comfort in her, and she's found in the book of Ruth, where I remembered the scriptures in my head. I'm like, who in the Bible can help me in this grief? I just kept scanning in my head, like, who has the language that can communicate what it is that I'm feeling right now? I'm like, who as a woman can speak my language of loss? And so I found Naomi in Ruth 1, verses 20 and 21. And she named it. When I came back to Dallas, I felt so broken. She said, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. I'm like, this is it. This is the language. This is how I'm feeling. I feel empty because God has afflicted um, pain on me. Now, I know there are many people listening, and theologically, they're like, God didn't do this. God is not the orchestrator of evil and this and that. Naomi sounds like she's saying, she's blaming God for inflicting so much pain. I don't care what the theology is right now in your head, but for the sufferer, the one that is in pain and suffering, we have this language that God, you are sovereign, you are over the heaven and earth. You could have stopped this. And we have pain right now. And I think, and I've thought about this a while, that and I was afraid of my thoughts. I was afraid of these thoughts because I'm like, God at some point is going to smite me and he's going to get angry back at me. And I don't want to feel God's wrath and anger. And I cannot let these thoughts I can't let them pervade. I cannot have these thoughts. But you know what? I felt the presence of God even in those thoughts, that God was okay with my thoughts. Like, God is not fragile. I find that, as parents, I would, tell my children, you better watch your tone. Don't talk to me like that. Because parents, we're fragile. We want our kids to be respectable parents. And so we don't want our children to talk a certain way, even when they're angry, even when they're lost. We want our children to have certain tone and certain ways to talk to us. But God is not fragile like parents. God welcomes those conversations. God is man, woman enough, to embrace their children that are in distress and that are saying things that, that they just need a hug. They just need to express the pain that's in our hearts. And Naomi gave me that language. So I call her theologian Naomi. She is leading the way for us to have language and for us to find language to speak about the suffering and the pain that is all over. So she leads the way. She really does. Her Job, she's like the female Job, where she's speaking about God in the midst of her pain.
Mm.
Yeah.
So much that you just shared there. Thank you for that, Julia.
You're welcome.
I really like what you're bringing into this conversation, that God is not fragile, that God can handle our worst thoughts and our worst feelings. And that is a lie of the enemy to prevent us from bringing our hurts and our woundedness to God, to our Heavenly Father. The enemy says, oh, you can't say that to God.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's wrong. He'll smite you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the enemy's trickery, I believe, to keep us isolated and alone, to the point where hopefully we break.
Yeah.
And then we act out in our life with vices and sinfulness, etc. And that's what the enemy's going for. He's literally going for the destruction of God's children.
Right.
And that God gave you that the opportunity to really see that that's the benefit of being a believer, is that not that you're prevented from suffering, not that you're protected from suffering all the time. because suffering, as we know biblically, is very good and very useful at times in our lives. And it's the very thing we need to grow or to move forward. And God will use that suffering. But it's not that God promises to protect us as believers, but he gives us where to take the suffering, right? To give it to him, to put it in his arms. And it's his strength that carries that burden.
Yeah.
Why do you think God has taught you this lesson? Not why, I should say. I this is something I catch myself all the time with, and I also instruct my own clients is why questions with God are useless.
Yeah.
They actually lead to more frustration.
Yeah.
Ask what questions rather than why questions. God, why are you doing this? Why did this happen? Why didn't you protect me? Right there, it just creates bitterness and resentment
Yeah.
and blame. But rather, what? What are you trying to tell me? What are you showing me right now? What do you want me to learn from this? What do you want me to do
Right.
next? And the what questions are where the power is. And when we
Yeah.
ask powerful questions, we get powerful answers. So, what has God been trying to tell you or has taught you about him, about others, about yourself through this affliction, this time of
Yeah.
grief and loss in your life?
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying the why and the what, because the whys are really not helpful um, when we're in the midst of pain and suffering, because the more whys we ask, the more and empty answers we get from well-meaning people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, People will try to answer the why, and for those listening, I would even recommend, when we hear sufferers asking why, to do your best to not try to answer the whys. I know, we live in America and we live in the Western um, society where we have answers to every question. These are questions that's not yours to answer. The sufferer wants you to sit with them, bring food, wash their clothes, be present, bring money, those things, because grieving loss, the loss of a person brings all kinds of challenges. What God is teaching me, it's so layered. I think one of the key lessons that I'm learning is about time. I think it was Lupita that said something that Bozeman's wife says, you have time, something about you have time, but don't waste time. So it's teaching me to slow down, but spend time doing quality things, like slow down your pace. Like, don't be so frantic in thinking that resources will run out and you're just flailing, that I need to get this resource today, today, today. If not, the world is going to fall apart. Settle down. The world is not going to fall apart. And if it does, God is within her. She will not fall, right? So there's this pace that has slowed down for me, where I'm not pursuing as anxiously as I used to. There is an anxiety that happens in us in this Western world where we feel like the more we are doing, the faster we are going, the more that we show that we are accomplishing, the better. And I think that's a lie that causes anxiety, like clinical depression, that causes unhappiness, that causes us to, it robs us. It takes so much away. It takes time from family. It takes time from ourself. We don't know who we are at the end of the day. We have our hands in so many different pots that we're just lost, So I think grief has taught me to just settle down, be still, and know that God is God. Just watch your pace. You're okay. Keep walking. You're fine. You don't have to run all the time. You don't have to engage this anxiety machine all the time. Like, settle down, check your breath, check your heart rate, do it well, and go with God. The second thing is teaching me is the quality of my work. Like, do good work, like do purposeful work, do meaningful things. Um, spend time on those things. Have meaningful relationships, have deeper relationships. Don't spend too much time on shallow things. Um, Find the things that are, um, meaningful to spend your days on. And for me, that's what I've been moving into, is just really looking at the quality of my work, the meaning behind my work, the purposefulness of my work. How is it serving others? How is it supporting others? How is it making an impact in the kingdom? Um, the third thing is teaching me, I think that goes with the first, is presence. To if I'm if I've committed to something, commit to it. If I'm talking to someone, have a conversation with them. If I'm eating, eat. If I'm drinking, drink. Is just be present. Show up fully. Don't show up while you have a zillion things on your brain. Like, put some things down. When it's time to show up for someone, show up and let the Spirit of God connect you with that person. So yeah, grief is teaching me that. And I think the fourth might be that community, grieving as a community is important. Don't grieve alone. It's interesting that in both Job and Naomi, they weren't alone, even though, in Job's case, the company wasn't necessarily all that great. But there's a lesson in that, to not grieve alone. I think and then the pandemic taught me that, because when I came back in January, I was alone in my grief. And then the pandemic happened and I felt lonely. I felt alone and lonely. But then the pandemic happened. All of a sudden, I felt like I had a whole nation, a whole world of mourners and grievers that joined me in this grief and loss. And all of a sudden, I didn't feel as alone in my grief, because everyone was talking about loss. Not and it I didn't feel good that they lost people, but it felt good that I had a community of people that were grieving, that had the language, that understood the language of the griever and the mourner. So those are a few of those lessons that I think I'm taking with me. Um, I hate the pain and suffering, and I don't understand it yet. I can't tell you I understand why God uses pain and suffering, because I do believe God wants good for us. I do believe He wants us to flourish. But I also notice that there's a dynamic in the Gospels where pain and suffering, in the Gospels and all throughout the Bible, that pain and suffering is a strong tenet of our faith, and what to do, and how God shows up in the midst of pain and suffering, how His power is made evident in pain and suffering. So I don't have answers for that. I do know I hate it, He hates it, but He uses it, if that makes any sense.
That does. BC Nation, maybe you're struggling with grief right now, or you're struggling with loss. We all are at some point. some moment of our life, sometimes many times. I think a big lesson I'm taking out of this conversation with Julia is that, one, God is not as fragile as we think. He can handle our worst thoughts. He's waiting for us to bring them to him. When we bring them to him, he uses them and brings good out of them. And also, I take from this conversation to slow down your anxious pursuits, to really just slow down that franticness of life, to stop following the crowd. They may look good on the outside or have shiny things, possessions, but on the inside, many are just hollow corpse walking around. Let's be real. That's why when you speak to some people, even very successful people, there's a deadness in their eyes. Don't you see it? The other thing I'm taking from this conversation is be still and know that God is in control. We are not, because we're not God. Whether that be as a world or that be as our own lives, we're not in control of anything. It's important to get that. Also, I take from this, Julia recommends do purposeful work. Do things that mean something. In order to do that, you got to slow down and see what actually matters in your life. And then she says, deepen your relationships. Like, really focus on those people in your life that matter. Look at your wife right now. She matters. Look at your husband. He matters. They're doing life with you. You may not like the way they show up all the time. But guess what? They don't like the way you show up all the time. But they're there. They're not leaving. They haven't left. They're doing it with you. They're struggling with you. Let them in. Let them into your heart. And then she says, don't grieve alone. Grieve in community. That's powerful. Grieve in community. And right now we're grieving as a nation. We're grieving as a world. It's a global grief that's happening. Yeah. Years ago, 9/11, we grieved as a nation. When we took loss, when we took hits as a nation, we came together. We put aside ideologies, we put aside theologies, and we just grieved as humans, one nation under God. And I believe now we're grieving as one planet, one world under God. And it may not look like that in the media, but the media represents a very tiny percentage. Always remember that. They are the minority. All the hate, the violence, that's the minority. They're just really loud. The majority look like you and I. They look like Julia. Awesome, amazing human beings who are loving and big-hearted, who suffer and grieve, who put family first as best we can. It's the one thing we all have in common is family. It's the one thing we're all working at, striving towards is family. It's family. It unites every single human on the planet, family. And we're part of a bigger family, the family of God. It's quite a blessing. So I just give you all that and serve that up. And Julia, I think, has done a heroic job of doing that. And the biggest thing I'll leave you with personally is, if you're grieving or in a time of loss in your life, stop asking why questions. Start asking what questions. It will shift everything for you instantaneously. And you'll start to get real answers to the real suffering that you're experiencing. Julia, what do you want to add to this to wrap us up? This has been a very powerful conversation.
Yeah. I'm grateful that you had me come on to share a little bit. So thank you for that. Now, I think, I've shared all that I can share, or most of it, because it's grief. It's a process. And so for those of us that are mourning and grieving, all the losses, just allow yourself to go through the process and know that God is present. There's no formula for grieving. It's just what it is, as long as God is with you in the process, and you allow God to be present in the process. That's how we do it, one day at a time. So keep walking and keep grieving, keep mourning. It is a part of life. So yeah.
Fantastic advice. And BC Nation, if you're not grieving right now, maybe you're going through a time of joy and celebration in your life. Congratulations. That's awesome, right? That happens for all of
Yes.
us.
Yeah.
But maybe there is someone in your life that is grieving, and maybe you've stayed away from them because, like Julia said, nobody wants to be around grief.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's somewhat depressing. But I think she gave great advice, what you can do to help them. Don't answer their why questions. Why is this happening to me? Why is God doing this? Why did God allow this? Don't answer those questions. Rather, give them what questions as a gift, and bring that to them and say, well, I don't know why. Nobody does. But maybe ask yourself, have you considered, what is God trying to teach you? What is God trying to show you? What is God using this pain to create in your life, to break through maybe something that he just couldn't get through with anything else to get your attention? What is it? And that's a gift. And then also just be present in their lives, spend time with them, sit with them, listen, show up, cook a meal for them. I remember when we had our first baby girl here, we just had some friends just text me and show up at a house with dinners, home cooked meals. We didn't ask for it. We actually didn't need it, but it was really awesome. And they just came and just said, "Here, we cooked for you, so you don't have to tonight." Like, what a gift. Like, that's community. That's beautiful. So be that
Yes.
gift in someone's life right now. It's those tiny little things that make people feel loved. All right. So we're speaking with Dieula Previlon. You can find her at juliaprevilon.com. Julia, let's do a quick confession round and then let's wrap up the show. I know you did this last time on episode 275, but things have shifted and I think your answers may shift as well. What is your favorite thing about God
Oh,
in this time?
His presence.
Yeah, his presence. What's
Yeah.
your least favorite thing about God when it comes to grief and loss?
His, at times, silence.
Yeah. Because sometimes you just got to go through that process, right? He's right there, but there's no.
He's silent. He's a silent partner.
He's a silent partner. What are you most afraid of in these times?
Dying without a purpose.
Yeah. Got that. For me, I think it's dying with broken relationships that have not been healed, that I haven't done the work and deepened, I haven't gone first in. Yeah. What did you spend way too much time doing in the beginning of your grieving process?
That's a good one. I want to say anger, but I felt like the anger propelled me into where I am. Like it was necessary, but I did spend a lot of time in anger. I wouldn't say it was too much. So I'll stay with anger, but I think it was warranted.
Got it. What secret fear do you have about people in regards to you sharing your grief or loss with them?
That they would try to fix it.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
What do you wish you had learned sooner about God and grief and loss?
Time, that he gives us time. He's not in a rush for us to be healed, quote unquote, from grieving. That's
a good point.
It's a process.
He wants us to fully recover from the heart surgery. Yeah. And we want like instant recovery, back on our feet tomorrow. Right. And like, I got things to do, God. Like, let's get this done with.
Yeah.
What is a new habit you want to form or create right now during this grief process as you're wrapping it up or coming towards the end of it?
Just more meditation, time to be still. I'm working on it. It's not perfect yet.
Yeah, I
So
got that.
just meditating.
And is there any bad habit that you want to break right now based on our conversation?
Oh, too much time on social media.
I think BC Nation, if you are going through any type of loss or grief, the worst thing you can do is to be online on social media. It's a recipe for instant depression.
Yeah.
Don't make it worse. It's gasoline on the fire. Don't
It
do it.
is. It is.
Awesome. Pick 3 words to describe who you are right now at this moment during your grief and loss.
Reflective, slower, kinder.
Interesting. Pick 3 words to describe who you were before the grief and loss hit when you were doing all your pursuits and productiveness.
Anxious, unaware, a little bit more surface.
Yeah, got that.
Yeah.
And last question. If you could come back to life after you died and tell your family and friends only one piece of advice about grief and loss, suffering and God, what would you say to them?
I would want to give them some hope about Jesus, that he's real. It's amazing. This is amazing. So I think knowing that Jesus is real and that there is an afterlife gives hope. What makes grieving hard is sometimes we lose sight of hope.
Yeah. So coming back and saying, hey, it's all worth it. Keep pushing, keep going.
Exactly.
It's going to be great.
Yes.
Awesome. Any final wisdom? What's the one thing you want my listener to know about, bringing their grief and loss to God?
Keep walking. Keep walking. Keep staying the course. When you find yourself stopping, that's when you should be concerned. But as long as you're walking, however messy, however staggered your steps may be, just keep walking.
Just keep walking, BC Nation. Good advice. Julia, best way for our listeners to get in touch with you if they just want to reach out and tell you how you sharing with vulnerability today impacted what they're going through. Yeah.
Just go on my website. You'll find all of my information to get in contact with me. Dieula Previlon.com, DIEULA, Previlon, PREVILON.com.
And BC Nation, if you want to go through me to send a note to Julia, that's fine. Or you want to share something with me as well. My email is joseph@josephwarren.net. Joseph is spelled JOSEPH. So joseph@josephwarren.net. And I'll be sure to forward that communication to Julia directly. Hopefully this conversation has touched your heart and your life in some way and has made you a better person because of the time you spent today listening. Julia, I wish you God's love, peace, and joy in your life, girl.
Thank you. Same to you.
Cheers. BC Nation, you cannot show up authentically in your life without building faith in your business. If you want the business side of that conversation, I have another podcast called First 100K, where I interview successful entrepreneurs about how they made their first $100,000, because that's where I believe 90% of you are stuck and you can't break through. Go to first100k.com to find out how. I'm Joseph Warren. You were made for greatness, so stop being a wuss and start being a winner. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you right back here next week.